Okay. Part two. I went out and chewed up the center. I gave myself a little cut, it looks bigger than it is, by reaching into a bucket that had a draw knife in it in my truck, so don't do that. So now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to hollow that out. So first I'm going to redraw the line up the outside, then I'm going to carve two, like so. And as always, feel free to ask questions about anything. Doesn't have to be about what I'm doing. I can talk and carve at the same time. Okay. All right, now I've got my line drawn. And, okay, so I now have 3 hook knives from Matt, my friend Matt White. He and I do Spoonosaurus together. He also makes all my knives. So this is the original Monadnock. Now he also makes now a scoop, which has the same curvature as the Monadnock, just extended further over. And he also makes now a slightly more open sweep. It's also bigger. You missed the beginning. Did I also do that with an adze or with a knife? I did it all with the knife before. What I'm going to do is, and I think this is how Matt's going to do it in the future, the Monadnock is going to have a slightly more aggressive grind that will be better at hogging stuff out. And then these will have slightly less aggressive grinds that will be easier to achieve a nice smooth surface with at the end. So what you're going to see me do is use the Monadnock, this guy, to really tear into that grain, get it down to shape, and then you'll see me switch to probably this one to get in the gutter, and this one to get the broad surface at the bottom as clean as possible. So that's the plan. When you put on these bark sheaths that Matt gets, always hold them like this, and then slide them on like that. Never hold them here, because if your finger slips, you could end up slicing your finger on the edge. So always hold them here, and then they slide on very nicely. It allows you to sort of pre-form the curve a little bit with your fingers, and it's super easy, super safe, and works well. So here I am. As always, main hogging out cut is just this, opening and closing, opening and closing. And you can see that I never actually hit my thumb, which is on the far side for support, because it just gets clamped down in my hand beforehand. I'll have to see. I have a Band-Aid under this tape, but Band-Aid is not the right size to really fit my finger. Let me see. I have any Band-Aids that are slightly larger. It's that right here. Oh, wait, here we go. Wow, ha, ha, ha. Excellent. Yeah, this tape doesn't work so well. Actually, the irony is this Band-Aid was actually sticking rather well, but this one will be less bulky. Okay. All right. That out. Okay. So here I go. Now the reason the adze is worthwhile is look at how easily I'm able to chow down through this depth where the adze has broken up the wood fibers. Now I also didn't want to get too close to the edges, so that limited the amount of adzing I was going to do. But you can see I've already hogged out a significant portion here, and that took me, what, 15 seconds? So you recognize that monster Band-Aid, that's right. Yeah, these ones with the little arms that wrap around your fingers, they're just the best. They're just better. I need to get more. They're also that flexible fabric, which just, it clings better, too. Yours heal up okay, Dan? Okay, so you can see I'm just coming down one side, I'm working my way up and then down, up and then down, up and down, and then I'll flip it around and do it from the other side too. And this is how you remove most of the material from this. But you can see how quickly it can go. So part of it at this point, now that it's deeper, it has less to do with opening and closing my hand, a knuckle bandage, and it has more to do with sort of swooping down through the cut with my whole hand rather than opening and closing. If I just did opening and closing, I'd have these little tiny cuts, and that works okay. But once you get comfortable with your tool, you can go a lot faster if you just apply more pressure. You just have to be absolutely sure that you're doing it safely so that, you know, if you apply too much pressure and you haven't thought through what happens to the blade if my hand slips, then you end up slicing yourself badly. In this instance, because my whole hand is moving, if I pop through, my whole hand is lifting up and I'm not going to hit my thumb either way because my whole hand is moving, but it allows me to really dig into those cuts and remove a lot of material swiftly. On the front face, you have to be careful because it has a tendency to chip out. You can see right here how I was coming across and then it just chipped out. So I would recommend coming through and carving a special bevel on the front face that helps keep it from chipping out like that. But you have to be, well, is whimpering in her sleep. But you have to be careful because with a scoop like this that doesn't have, you know, a rim at the end, that end grain will want to tear out as you get down close to it. So you have to be gentle down at that part of things. And then you see how as I'm doing it, I'm sort of pulling as far down as possible because what I want to start doing is making these sides steeper and steeper and steeper. And then it's just a lot of this. It's just a lot of going back and forth and back and forth. And honestly, you can see how fast that adds made things because a lot of times when you're carving, the thing that takes the most time is establishing the initial shape. And once you have the initial shape that sort of matches a little more closely the shape of your knife, the carving really smooths out and gets easier. So, but it's carving that initial shape that's tough. But you can see from the effort I'm putting in here how much force I'm putting behind the knife. But again, my whole hand is moving. So if that knife pops out, my whole hand is popping out with it and my thumb stays safe. And I'm also paying attention to where my other fingers and thumbs are, that they're not in the way, should that pop out. And then as I get close to the edge here, backing off that force. I don't want to be exerting quite so much twisty force with the blade. I want the blade to be slicing through a little more gently so I'm not stressing the end grain there. And then I've almost removed that rim that I did, so I'll do the rim again. Nice and gentle. And at this point, I'm also trying to make this bottom flat. So by coming down steeply, and now I've got enough depth in the middle that I can start to make the bottom flat. Depending on the tools you're using, you could probably really clean up the inside face of this scoop. Because I don't have a workbench with a vise or anything like that, I'm just using crooked knives, hook knives, and so the marks on the inside are limited to sort of how clean I can make it with the hook knives. Okay, now you can see that I haven't hit the rim here quite so much, so I'm going to keep that even. I'm going to go back and even that out. Try and keep my spoons at a sort of equal amounts of delicacy all around as they get more and more refined. That way I don't make one side so delicate that it can't withstand the pressure of dealing with the less delicate side. Right? Because as the spoon progresses, you're sort of handling it more and more gently as it becomes more delicate. And if you really get one side super thin, you know, finished thinness, and the other side you still need to do these big hogging out cuts, well, that's a problem because then you're really straining the wood. So hence I'm trying to get that entire length to an equal delicacy. Okay, like that. But you know, you start hauling without bringing the top of the bowl down. What about hauling when you have wood above the rim? I just start in the center, Dustin. I just start, so my rim tends to be already cut, right? So I have this angled bevel on the rim, and then I just start in the middle, and I keep away from the rim on all sides, and I work my way sort of around and around and around and down at the same time, so that by the time I'm getting close to the rim, I'm sort of down at the rim's level, and that's how I do it. I hope that answered your question. Okay, so now hogging out the other side. You can see this goes fairly quickly, but you can also see that I'm using a fair amount of force. Yeah. Oh, sorry, you're not going to be able to see it there. Okay. And one side is usually better than the other side about letting you get into the center. In this case, it's this side. It's going to let me cross over into the center a little bit. So that's the side where I'm going to start cleaning up the center and flattening it out, just like that. And again, I'm trying to be fairly systematic about it so I don't leave any one area thicker than the rest. And I have to come back to it later. I want to get everything at once. And then what I've usually found is that getting this middle bit where the bottom curves down, you know, just takes that much longer to get down into it. And honestly, this is where you like put on a podcast and just zone out and get into it because it takes a while. So quick, someone asked me a question, so I can be out of my head and just making these cuts without having to talk about what I'm doing because it's not going to change not for about, I don't know, 10 minutes or so. Yeah. Okay. So now there's this little mountain in the center here that I got to make sure stays down. But I want to be careful that I'm not splitting the wood as I'm going to cut it off. Yeah, there we go. Good. And honestly, there's only so much hogging out my body can do at any one go, so I will often alternate back and forth between really strong, powerful cuts and then lightening up for a while, but keeping on cutting. I used to stop and just take a break, and I realized that, you know, that was time when I could have lightened back up and kept going and be done that much sooner, while still giving my body a break. So it's things like that that you gotta think about when you're thinking about making a living from doing something like carving. Is how to go easy on your body without stopping your motion entirely. You'll notice as I get up here to the rim here, that I'm actually kind of supporting the edge by squeezing it a little bit, so that as I pull down across here and I'm really putting some torque on this reduced grain in here, that I'm supporting it by squeezing it here as well. That's not really a substitute for just being gentler as I get further and further along, but it is something I find myself doing, so I'm sharing it with you. And then you can see how you start to get this grain in here. And to some extent, that grain tells you where you have left bumps, but it can also be a bit misleading. So it depends on how the scoop is oriented within the grain, how accurately it shows you those bumps. And sometimes you can use that too much as a guide and end up with something where it looks good if you're just looking at the grain, but when you're actually looking at the form doesn't match from one side to the next or within the line. So my rule of thumb with grain is almost always to just ignore it as much as possible. And if it ends up looking cool, it ends up looking cool, but after a year, you're not going to be noticing the grain. You're going to be noticing the form. So I'm in this for the long haul. I want my spoons to, you know, work really well a year in and not just look great when you first get them. Yeah, carving is tiring at long length. I would agree. It's definitely something I've had to work up to. When I started, you know, carving a spoon, it would take me a couple hours and I'd be totally exhausted. Then I was able to pick up my pace and I could carve a spoon in 45 minutes if I really wanted to. But I couldn't do that hour after hour. And now I can maintain that pace for a number of hours. And I'm actually just now realizing that I could be carving more per day. So for a while, how I spaced out my work had more to do with making sure I wasn't going too hard on my body, because I ran some experiments last fall where I was making stuff for a festival I was attending. And I wanted to see what it would be like to carve for 6-7 hours a day straight. And I found that it was hard on my body. And so I backed off and came out of the Christmas tree season only scheduling 3 to 5 hours of work of carving a day. But as with everything, you get better at using your body better and you build up muscles that you didn't have before. So now as I'm getting in here and doing, so this side is fairly close to what it's going to be. Hey, bye Dan. Now I'm starting to really clean up this. So this is kind of chattery in here. And as I'm carving this, I'm trying to make all my cuts smooth now. Because at some point, I'm going to want to be done. And I want to be able to stop at any point. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, so now I realize that I've built up muscles to the point, just from doing this every day, that I can carve for 6-7 hours and not have it wreck me the next day. So that's, I think I'm gonna start expecting a little more of myself, just to match what I can do. And I think that that's really important if you're carving for a living, because you could always space the work out more, but ultimately that means you don't make as much per year. So if you're trying to support your family, support yourself, you have to think in terms of not just how much work do I have lined up, but how much work am I accomplishing each day. And so for me, I realized, I could always book work further and further and further out, but until I start challenging myself to carve more each day, I won't actually make more within the year, which is kind of crazy to think about. I'm so used to thinking just in terms of how much work has come in, but we're not calibrating that against time. Have you thought about this, Dustin? I imagine this is something you think about too. Or rather, we're calibrating our work against time, but it's like per unit, and not thinking about it in terms of and we're either thinking about per unit, or we're thinking about it as overall, what the work has come in. But really, the deciding factor is how many units per day. And then that gets extrapolated out over the course of the year. Definitely tried to bite off more than you could chew when you first started selling stuff. You burnt out quick. Yeah, did you have carpal tunnel or something in your hand? What happened? Can you tell us more of the story? I realize you have to put down the phone to do that. And so then the other thing I realized, this was literally yesterday, I was doing a lot of thinking about this. I realized that because I always have the option of, just scheduling the work out as it makes sense, that no one is going to make me do more work per day except myself, that I have to be the one pushing myself to do that. Which is just a really interesting position to be in, because up until now, there's always either been a time limitation, with the Christmas trees, or with my editing, the work comes in and it's prepaid and I have a 2-week turnaround guarantee, and so I just have to scramble and make it happen. But this is new, to find myself in a situation where I'm totally in control of how much work I produce each day, and I have to calibrate it. I have to take into account my body and what it can handle, and my home life and what I need that to be like to be happy, and making sure I don't burn out, and just the whole thing. And but I think we're used to having sort of external forces demand from us certain effort. But I find myself in this funny situation where I'm the only one who can demand more effort from myself. So I decided yesterday that I was going to start demanding it of myself. Right now I probably carve. So what I realized was I need to think of it in monetary terms, not in terms of hours per day, but I need to be scheduling out a certain amount of work per week. And right now I usually make, if you count in lessons, right now I usually make between 350 and 500 a week of stuff and or time in lessons. But it's more often closer to the 350 mark. Although that's going to change as lessons become more prevalent. But what I realized was that what I really need to do is start hitting that $500 a week mark. And that the only way to do that was just to schedule it, because I'm really good. Once I sort of schedule in work for the week and I make a plan for the week, I get it done, no matter what it takes. But if I don't schedule it out that way, then I'm not necessarily going to push myself to do more because I feel like I've accomplished my list, if you see what I'm saying. So, all right, so now I'm getting to the point where I have to, I'm biting down into these corners more, and I'm getting pretty thin. So I want to make sure that I, let's see. All right, I want to make sure that I don't stress out these corners too much. What does Dustin say? I want to do a farmer's market, need inventory, self a 10 spoon a week goal in batches. Didn't work out, tried 3 a day, couldn't keep it up either. No real physical problem, just generally too worn out and not motivated to carve more. That is totally true. Yeah, you know, it's and I would say the hard part about, you know, farmer's market or something like that is if things don't sell, then you sort of feel like, well, what am I pushing myself so hard for? Which is why I've really appreciated switching to a pre-ordered commissioned work model, is that, you know, I know it's sold, I just need to deliver. And that's easier to ask of myself than sort of to produce for some unknown future thing. What are they saying though? About the 500 a week, right? So then if I can do 500 a week, that gives me 2,000 a month, 2,400. So if by this time next year I can be doing, 24,000. So if like this time next year I can be doing 24,000 a year from spoons, then with the Christmas trees and the editing, that will be a dramatic change from, you know, last year where I was at 8,000. So that's, you know, but I don't know what that's going to take to push up to that level. You know, on one level, I feel like I don't have time. Like there's always something to be done with my time. But if that's the goal for growth, and if that's the goal for sort of hitting that next level of what I'm capable of, then it's just really useful to articulate it, right? Like until I articulated it, it like hadn't crossed my mind. I just was thinking in terms of, okay, just increase the waiting list. Saying, now you're worrying about trying to sell 1 spoon a day. Yeah, you know, that's interesting. That's exactly where I found myself, and to some extent where I find myself. Although my price increased after maybe 6 months of doing that, I had enough of a back order that I decided to increase my prices. And I have to say, that's what I found worked for me. That like, I wanted to improve. I would much rather sell a spoon at some price and move on and carve the next one and get better and better, and just have more opportunities flowing from the posting about the different work that I was doing than fixate on selling at a market at a certain price. I have to say that has really worked for me. I'm psyched to see you pursuing the same thing. I think that, you know, you start with that and then you can go up from there. But if you start too high and it doesn't, you know, you don't have the pull of demand, then you can get really unmotivated to carve because you feel like, there's just not enough demand for it. Well, there might be, but you're not there yet in you know, where you are. And I'm speaking about myself. You know, I wasn't there yet when I was trying to charge more than I do now. And I sort of heard that from a lot of people. And I got that feedback, not directly, indirectly, from people who would buy one thing but wouldn't come back and buy more. And I got that feedback subconsciously from myself and how I felt about what I was doing. So as soon as I started charging less and stuff, you know, I was in the same boat as you, Dustin. How recently? Maybe a year ago, I was in the same boat of like, had the goal of carve one thing a day and sell it. And you know, it didn't seem like much when you carve one thing a day, but then that kept me going. and it kept me feeling inspired to carve, and then that built and built and built. So that now I can carve 5 or 6 things a day if I want to. So then it becomes a question of like realizing that I'm capable of doing that, and realizing that that's what financially makes sense at this point to do. You sell stuff at the farmer's, but you're not able to make up inventory by the next week's farmer's market. Actually, you just didn't have anything to bring. Right, which sort of, which begs the question, if you can sell it without having to go to farmer's market, why go to farmer's market? And somebody could look at it and say, well, you need to be charging more for your work. But I don't know. I find that especially when you sell face-to-face to your neighbors, there's sort of a price that feels right to charge depending on where you are. And if you charge more than that, it starts to feel like you're breaking some sort of social contract of expectation within your community. And you could argue against that and say that, oh, it's just in your mind. But in my experience, that felt true. It felt real. I didn't like having to defend my price to somebody in person or online. I would much rather have the value of it be self-evident by how good it was and the combination of how good it was and the price I was charging. That's really interesting that you find yourself sort of basically in the same situation I found myself in maybe a year and a half ago. I'm really curious to see what happens. You just feel like if they're cheap enough, they're going to sell, and then you're in control of how much you make based on how much progress you make as a carver. That is exactly where I found myself, and really where I find myself today, that it puts the power back into my hands. That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah. And I think that what you're describing there is like, if I had a piece of advice for somebody who wanted to start doing this as a living, it would be that. It would be to, sell cheap enough that they're going to sell, and then the control is all with you in terms of how much you make. And then as demand grows, you can raise your prices if you want to. But that way you have the control. All right, so as I get deeper and deeper, it wants to sort of tear out right here in the corner, so you gotta you have to really kind of come down and then pull out so that you're not letting it just dive in here at the corner, but you're actually coming across it here. People have given you flack for selling too cheap. I've been a huge inspiration to you. Oh, good. Hey, Dan, I'm glad you're enjoying the conversation. Yeah, I mean, I got a huge amount of flack as well when I started doing it. I had people tell me that I was, undercutting what they were charging and devaluing what people were willing to pay for a quality piece of work. And I think the key is you got to go your own path. You got to do what's right for you, as long as it's not hurting somebody else directly. And I have to. I feel like if I feel like it's perfectly all right to be in competition with one another, even though people get uncomfortable talking about that. B, that doesn't mean just because you're competing with somebody that you can't also collaborate with them. And C, as much as we think we're all sort of in the same market, and to some extent we are, depending on how much you sell online and through Instagram and all that, but like we're also have our unique situation that is different for each of us. And and I've said it before, and I think people gloss over this. You look at Robin or Jared, and they're both charging a lot more for their work than I am. And you say, oh, how can you undercut those guys? They've worked so hard to be where they are. But they both have written quite publicly that they spent years selling cheap and selling cheaply and as quickly as they could make them, and that experience really formed their skills as a maker. And I don't think you can, as much as we like to think that you've been carving for a couple of years and you should now be selling your stuff for $35 a spoon. That's not what they did, and I think you can't really skip over that. Morning, Sean. Philosophy, yes. Are we singing Fleetwood Mac now? Is that what's happening? I think that there is a real benefit to having that period of really pushing yourself to make something swiftly and sell it cheap and in quantity, and have that both have that time pressure and have the sort of exposure and experience that gives you. And I'm still in it, I'm not out on the other side where Jared's at. I mean, everyone's on their own path. I think Jared is a doubt of wherever he's at, but I'm definitely not at that level yet. And so there's no point in me pretending that I'm on the same playing field as these guys, because I'm not. And won't be for years. And there's something, that once I sort of let go of that, there's something very freeing about it. I think ultimately you charge whatever you feel like charging. There's no wrong thing to charge. And either it sells enough for your taste or it doesn't, and then you adjust. Okay, so now that I've really started scooping along here, what are you saying there, Dan? Yeah, Jared's in Japan right now. And it looks like he's seeing some really interesting things too. It feels like everyone wants to skip the step where you put in your time, or think about putting in your time in some sort of like structured, like you have to apprentice, or you have to, take master classes from somebody, or you have to do this or have to do that. And I think selling cheap and in bulk is as much a master class as anything else, because you learn an awful lot. And that's really, it's just time with a knife. So the more economic incentive you can give yourself to carve, the faster you'll progress. This is not a sport where you're competing against somebody else. You're just competing against yourself. All right, so as I'm trimming up the bowl like this, you have to be careful that you're not digging into the grain, because you could rip out this rim fairly easily. You can carve rather than obsess over prices. That's a really good way to put it. And I don't know about you, but I also find that I really like not having work stockpile up. I really like having it. It's in, it's out. It just keeps it about the process and not about the objects themselves. I mean, obviously, I want the objects to be good, but by having work that leaves the house within a week and not having a big backlog of work kicking around, it just keeps it about my process and where I am right now, and not where I was a month ago, not where I was 6 months ago. Somebody asked me, well, why couldn't I just carve spoons all year and then sell them for a higher price at Christmas? Well, probably by the time I got to Christmas, I wouldn't want to sell some of the ones I carved earlier on in the year, because I would look at where I was now and where I was then and think, oh, how can I sell these to people? Now, people wouldn't care, but I'd care. So psychologically, it's very helpful for me to have it be this way. And it's like I'm not in a point in my life where I can go and apprentice with somebody. So this is the way that I can give myself that experience of doing as much work as I possibly can. And then in 10 years, when I'm at a different point in my career, I'll be charging a different amount. So, and I figure every year I'll raise my prices a couple bucks, and it'll be worth it because my work will be so much better than it was. But if I start too high, then I don't end up with that. I end up feeling burnt out, or I end up with like selling all my stuff on sale. And you know, a sale price is really just you realizing that you charged too much to begin with, and the market didn't want to pay that. So I hate putting things on sale. I don't think I ever have. It's just it irks me. I'd much rather sell too cheap than try and go too dear and end up putting something on sale, or not selling it at all. Because then I feel it devalues whatever future claim I make for its value. You caught up the vast majority of commissions for doing this sell one a day thing. Yeah. Yeah, and I think the key is if you're gonna change your prices, lock everybody who's ordered something into that price. For instance, I'm about to change my lesson price because I've realized that, you know, most lessons actually take 5 hours, even if I hope that they're going to take 4 hours. It's just there's so much stuff to cover that they're always ending up to be about 5 hours. But everyone who's lined up a class with me or even talked with me about a desire for a class, they're going to get locked in at the old price. And then that way I'm not screwing anyone over when I change my price. Everything is totally clear and above board, and people who, you know, get locked in at the old price recognize that I'm treating them fairly, and there's a rationale for why my price is increasing. All right, so now at this point I'm remembering that I have these other hook knives. You're working a regular job and raising 2 kids and trying to get your life together after divorce. Don't have the time for apprentice or school. Right, you have to pay the bills. So that's exactly right. So it's a nice, you know, carving a spoon a day is a nice model for, you know, it's still a tremendous number of spoons, and it's a nice model for getting yourself to a level that you otherwise wouldn't have gotten to. All right, so now I'm switching to a less aggressive blade. That doesn't mean it's less sharp. It just means that the angle of attack is slightly less, and that also means it exits out of the cuts more easily, which as I get deeper and deeper becomes more and more important, that I can exit out of a cut smoothly. So, you know, now we're into uncharted territory for me, so I'm sort of feeling it out. I'm using the scoop hook that has the same curve as the monadnock to do the gutters on either side and probably up here. And then I'll try the wider scoop on the bottom of the bowl and maybe up on the sides and see what I can get in terms of fewer track lines across. Because right now, you know, I end up with a certain number of track lines across the bowl, and depending on how fine and overlapping I make them, it amalgamates to a more or less smooth surface, but there's always some texture there. So using a curvature that would create less texture is one way to smooth that out. And I have to say these are really nice because they're reliably exiting from the cut. Okay. Coming from the other direction. And it's just about doing sort of overlapping strokes so that you're creating as smooth a surface as you can. Right here doesn't want to carve down there anymore. That's how the grain is. It wants to be carved up from the bottom. So again, this is where a less aggressive cut is helpful. And then we'll push this rim down. All right, we're getting pretty close now. It's closing in on 2 hours, so even if I'm not carving to a clock, it's useful to use a clock to sort of give you some sort of cue of when you should be done, because as with everything with carving, there's always more you can do. You know, I could push this further and further and further and further and further, and would it be a better scoop in the end? Not necessarily. One thing I will want to do is push these corners out just a little bit. I don't want to make them a sharp corner or not. But, is this almost a tuka cam? It is, yeah. It's kind of a tuka cam that instead of drooping down below the handle is cocked over the handle, which means that I can really get in here like this, which is nice. What's that, Sean? You're using the Robin Hood hook. Do you sharpen on the inside or do you sharpen on the outside? I sharpened the Robin hook on the outside. Yeah. I just got really good at, this was my block of wood with the sandpaper. I got really good at basically going like this. And then the connection is right there in front of my eyes, Sean, and I can see if the edge is registered truly on the sandpaper. And that way, that motion, even though it's a freehand motion, it's happening right in front of my eyeballs, and I can tell if I'm doing it accurately or not. Okay, so let's see here. I'm just gonna ease this out just a little bit. Now the main thing I want to make sure of is that I don't have any grain tear out. That's the main thing. It's okay for there to be facets. It's okay for there to be some irregularity to the surface, but I don't want any grain tear out. That's going to result in a surface that won't be easy to wash. I want it to be easy to wash. So to some extent, it means coming at stuff from the opposite direction of how I've been carving them. Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to switch to the wider knife and see what that will do, that gentler curve. You were nodding along. Modify more, we could sharpen emphasis on the outside. Yep. Okay, so again, shallower curve. And this is maybe my second time using this, so we will see what we will see. Yep. Good. Be able to clean up that grain tear out here. Dive that corner a little bit deeper. Continue. Get that grain cleared up. Okay. And again, this knife has a less aggressive bite than the Monadnock, which means that I can exit out of the cut more easily. Like it just wants to exit sooner in the twisting process. Yeah, I like this knife for this. Look, it gives me just that much of a smoother surface. Okay. Yeah. This is really doing a nice job. It's amazing what just that little change in angle will do in terms of the smoothness that you can get with the knife. Yeah. I think this is going to be a real hit, Matt, if you're watching this. I've been wanting a knife that had a wider radius for a while now because sort of erring more and more on the side of trying to get my inner surfaces perfect. That's just where I'm going as a carver. And to some extent, that's just a factor of how well your knife matches the shape that you're trying to carve. And so having a wider surface will allow me to get spoon bowls for larger spoons that are almost flawless. Yeah, this is really nice. All right, so there's still a certain amount of texture on the inside, but it's mostly cleaned up. There's a little bit of grain tear out here that I need to resolve. And then really I should be done. You're never going to get 100% of stuff. A lot of times the trick is to stop while you're ahead. So this is the wide one. I have not tried out his like extra long handled one. But I think this is what you're talking about, Dustin. I haven't tried out the long handle one because I'm not really one to carve spoon bowls on the mule. So having something to be used two-handed just doesn't really apply to what I'm trying to do. Okay, so now I just need to trim up this rim here and remove any pencil marks from the top rim. Oh, and also push this edge out just a smidge more. Get that curve sweet. Okay. Be done, be done, be done. Good. Okay. Now one last thing I'm noticing is that when you look at it like this shoulder needs to come down just a smidge. Had one a slight compound curve, he said it was for cookies and stuff, he thought. Oh yeah, maybe. I forgot about that. No, I haven't tried that. That would be interesting. Again, I'm not much of a cooksit carver, so. All right, so now I'm trimming up this top surface. I'm also lowering the shoulder, which might require me to do a little trimming on the inside there. We'll see. Okay, lowered shoulder. Good. Carve this top rim. Okay. Good, good, good. And now I'm just finishing this bit here. Yeah. And again, going across end grain like this is where this knife with the shallow grind really excels. So that's why I'm using this in this instance. And again, kind of awkward to hold. So I'm trying not to squeeze too much, right? I don't want to squeeze this too much, because the lack of a rim there really changes how strong the spoon is. Like if you're ever making a set of salad servers that has more of like a tulip shape rather than a round shape, you'll be shocked once you remove that front rim, how much more delicate they feel. Might be nice for the sides of the flower scoops though. Maybe. I think probably more delicacy is to be gained from me gaining a sense of, you know, just how wide I should make it in order to achieve the size that I can easily achieve within the time frame that fits for the price point that I'm trying to hit, rather than, you know, be able to dig it out deeper. I think it's more training my eye through repeating it, sort of how big do I axe that initial shape. Because like for instance with my coffee scoops, if I get that shape accurately to the size with the axe right away, sort of what I want, those scoops take 45 minutes maximum. If I make them too big and I have a lot of material that I'm trying to remove with the knife, they can take, oh my God, they can take so long. They can take an hour and a half, easy. They can take easily double the amount of time. Same scoop, just didn't go far enough with the axe, didn't go far enough with initial cuts with the knife, had to sort of adjust and keep adjusting over time. Whereas, so the more I'm able to see ahead of time exactly what the dimensions are that I'm going for, the more I can hit those dimensions right away and not waste time dithering around back and forth. Yeah, I really think that speed in this has a lot to do with knowing exactly what you're going for. That's not to say you carve the same thing every time, but like, you know, knowing exactly what you're going for and then having the tools in your toolbox, not in the literal toolbox, but in like your skill set, like having the experience to then react to whatever the wood throws at you and just, you know, pivot to whatever you need to do to make it keep working. So if there's a knot that you need to avoid, you change the design. If there's something you realize you axe too thin, well, you change the design to take that into account. If something isn't working out as you're carving it, you shift to this other technique. And that's the thing that sort of keeps you on track for whatever time target you're aiming for, is the ability to sort of fluidly shift from element to element and from technique to technique. I imagine that's true across all sorts of disciplines. So, okay, and there we have it. Nice little flower scoop. I'm glad you learned something new. Right, exactly. Yep. Okay, so now, good. There's one little spot, didn't get chamfered quite as much. Okay, all the surfaces are chamfered. Ooh, here's one little thing. When you look at the back, you notice that I didn't do a great job of bringing up the bottom there. Ooh, I have 25 seconds remaining, guys. So I'm just going to bring up the bottom of this bevel so that if you're idly looking at it, it's more even. Okay, guys, it's been fun. I'm going to polish this up. Thanks so much. We'll just let it finish the sheet feed on.